I'd like to welcome Emily. Emily Parker works for Heal the Bay. She's a master's graduate from Scripps in marine biodiversity and conservation. Emily works to keep our oceans and marine ecosystems healthy and clean by advocating for strong legislation and enforcement both locally and statewide. She focuses on plastic pollution, marine protected areas, sustainable fisheries, and climate change related issues. Emily, it's yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to speak to you today about marine protected areas. So today's talk is going to be all about these very special protected areas right off our coastline. And we're going to talk about what they are generally. We're going to learn about how they work and the science behind the protected areas. And then we're going to learn specifically about California's network of MPAs. And then we're going to dive into our local MPAs, the one that we have right here in our backyard off the coast of Palos Verdes, and ones that you all as docents at PVIC will actually get to interact with pretty regularly and learn some tips and tricks for how to be stewards for your local MPAs or marine protected areas. So before we get started, I do want to begin with a land acknowledgement. As this event is virtual, we are all in different places around the Los Angeles area, perhaps around California, or maybe even around the country. But no matter where we are on stolen Indigenous land. So I'd like to quickly acknowledge the Heal the Bay's presence on Tongva land and our MPAs in Tongva and Chumash land. I'd like to also pay respect to Tongva and Chumash elders, both past, present, and emerging. If you don't already know whose land you're on, you can check out this link that I have here. It's nativeland.ca, and I'll throw that link in the chat for you all so that you can check it out if you'd like, if you don't already know what native land you're currently on. Dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their land and water is an ongoing process, and meaning it is something that is happening as we speak, and therefore it's important to understand and acknowledge the historical and current Indigenous presence on the land and the coastal waters that we're on and working to protect. All right, so let me dive in a little bit. So you already heard quite a bit about me. Again, my name's Emily. I'm the coastal and marine scientist with Heal the Bay. My pronouns are she, her, and I work predominantly at the intersection between science and policy. So I work predominantly in advocacy and conservation work for our coastal resources. This is me in the field doing a couple of marine protected area watch walks and some water collection samples. You're gonna learn a little bit more about these programs later today in the talk. And just really quickly, a little bit more about Heal the Bay. We're a nonprofit organization located in Santa Monica with 35 years of experience dedicated to making the greater LA coastal waters and watersheds safe, healthy, and clean. And we use research, education, community action, and advocacy to pursue that mission. All right, so let's dive into the meat of today's talk. What exactly are marine protected areas? Well, MPAs are marine or estuarine waters that are set aside primarily to protect or conserve marine life and its associated habitat. They're kind of like national or state parks, but underwater. There are many different levels of protection and allowed uses, but for the most part, they specifically address what we call take. So take can be resource extraction, but predominantly what we're talking about here, and when I say resource extraction, I mean like oil drilling, but predominantly what we're speaking to today is commercial and recreational fishing that is regulated inside these protected areas. There is a common myth that their protected areas are, you're not allowed to visit them, you're not allowed to recreate in them, like surfing or sailing. That's not the case. Only consumptive uses are regulated, and non-consumptive uses, like any kind of recreation, is totally permitted but regulated, and not regulated, sorry. All right, so how exactly do marine protected areas work? How do they protect and conserve marine life inside these special areas? Well, MPAs improve our oceans by protecting and restoring marine habitats and ecosystems. So MPAs essentially allow an already damaged area time and opportunity to recover by removing the stress of fishing and resource extraction. This increases resilience to environmental changes. So marine protected areas provide buffers against potentially damaging climate change impacts like global warming or sea level rise, or ocean acidification. And they're doing this by removing the already existing stressor of overfishing, which allows this protected area to become more resilient to other stressors like climate change. Lastly, these areas protect species and help to rebuild fish stocks. So inside protected areas, the idea is that we're going to have more fish, bigger fish, and higher species diversity. So not only are we aiming to protect and conserve these areas so that the biodiversity there and the ecosystem benefits there stay strong and remain, but also so that our fish stocks rebuild, so that we actually have more fish to eat, to take out of the ocean in the long run. And we already know that this works. We know that the science behind protected areas is successful. Based on a global review of 124 marine reserves around the world, this is a scientific study that was done. There was an increase in fish size. So we saw bigger fish of about 28% increase there. There was more fish seen inside these protected areas. So that was an increase of density by like 160%. And then we also saw an increase in biodiversity, or the different variety of fish, the different species that we're seeing. And that increased an average of 21%. So we know the science behind these protected areas really does work to protect and conserve marine life. Marine protected areas, the predominant sort of science behind them is that they protect whole ecosystems, not just individual species, thereby protecting the entire habitat and protecting all the ecosystem services that we get within these areas. So MPAs exist all around the world, and there are varying levels of degrees of protection inside all of these different marine protected areas. We have some that are massive, that span thousands of square miles. For example, the marine protected area in Hawaii called Papahanaumokuakea. That marine protected area is huge. Some MPAs are much smaller. For example, if you've been to Catalina, you've probably seen a teeny tiny little MPA, Lovers Cove MPA or the Casino Point MPA. These are smaller than an acre and they're very tiny. So these MPAs exist all over the place with varying sizes and regulations. But here in California, we have a very special and unique system of marine protected areas. We have a system of 124 MPAs all up and down our coast that are very specifically designed to work as a network. They're designed to work with each other to protect our entire coastline, not just the ecosystem that exists within that protected area. So I have a video that I'd like to show. And this video will explain California's system of marine protected areas way better than I possibly could. So I'm going to go ahead and share that video with you all now.
California's 1,100 miles of shoreline contains some of Earth's most remarkable ecosystems and wild creatures. Most, however, are rarely seen by those who live here, even though the Pacific Ocean is an essential part of their life. From the air we breathe to the food we eat, the ocean is a source of energy, transportation, climate, recreation, and the latest scientific discoveries of the deep. Its waters connect California to the world. And while some of these shores are pristine and wild, others are seriously threatened by increasing human impacts. These are real problems requiring real solutions. What is one tool being used to create a more resilient ocean in the face of many threats?
The Marine Protected Area Network in California is the largest continuous network of marine protected areas in the world. The network as a whole is 124 MPAs from border to border, from California-Oregon border down to the California-Mexico border.
So a marine protected area are defined areas that have some kind of regulation that limits human activities of some kind.
The way that we basically explain it is MPAs are like, national or state parks, but underwater. It's to protect the wildlife, the archaeological features, the geological features in that area.
In the case of California's MPAs, those protections include prohibiting or restricting fishing, collecting, and in some cases, even getting too close to offshore rocks.
There are 4 focal points for managing these marine protected areas: enforcement, monitoring and research, permitting and policy, and outreach and education. So together with our state and federal partners and our community partners, we are working together to manage this network to the best of our ability as we go forward.
The reason that we have 124 of these marine protected areas instead of, let's say, 2 or 3, is that it was the vision of all the stakeholders and all the people who care about the ocean to improve the resources from the Oregon border down to Mexico.
And this is huge because typically for fisheries management, we target single species. MPAs are unique in that you can actually protect the whole ecosystem, all the species that inhabit that ecosystem, how they interact with one another. And because of that, the larvae produced in each of those smaller protected areas are going to replenish populations along the coast from one protected area to the next. Now you're bathing the populations up and down the coast with larvae that are being produced in those protected areas.
And the whole idea of these marine protected areas is when you get that productivity, the fish don't sit there along that line. They go outside the line. Guess what? Fishermen have the opportunity to catch those fish, and that's absolutely in the plans for this whole process.
The MPA is like a savings account. If I want to be sure that I have something in the future, I need to put a little bit aside today. And that's a really small price to pay to be assured that my grandkids are going to be able to fish like I've fished. The design of the MPAs, they really were taking into consideration not only the science of habitat preservation and the environmental concerns, but also how do we make these things work for the other stakeholders that are also involved. So I think the marine protected areas can increase our opportunity rather than decrease it.
There, again, are different flavors of protection. We have those no-take marine reserves that exclude any kind of take of any species. But then there's conservation areas that will, in fact, allow some take of some species.
There are also state marine parks, state marine recreational management areas, and special closures.
One of the major partners that the state of California is working with is the MPA Collaborative Network. And that is a group of 14 different individual community groups coming together to help with the localized MPAs within their geographical region that they're interested in.
The MPA Collaborative Network is the grassroots effort to empower coastal communities to take on the stewardship of their local marine protected areas. We bring together the enforcement aspect, allied agencies, officers, people trying to gain compliance, bringing them together with the research side of things and the monitoring, so scientists, citizen scientists, people doing research out in the field, together with all the groups doing education and outreach.
That's what makes this network so unique, is that it really truly was a public-private partnership with the state of California and the citizenry to put this in place.
As the state park interpreter here at Point Lobo State Natural Reserve, I'm tasked primarily with the long-distance learning program. We call it the PORTS program, Parks Online Resource for Teachers and Students. And I get beamed into classrooms throughout California and beyond to teach students about the kelp forest as well as our marine protected areas, our MPAs. What do you think that this kelp bug eats?
Is it kelp?
That's right.
I think marine protected areas are essential for the community to really get engaged in these protected areas and to learn about them. We take students from underserved communities that have never been to the ocean sometimes. It's incredible, but even if they live in San Diego, they've never been to the ocean, and they come in and they see a sea lion for the first time while kayaking, and they get that love and appreciation for these areas. We know that we're building the next generation of ocean stewards.
After years of protection in California, some Channel Islands MPAs indicate we're on the right track and have shown measurable increases in populations. Rick Rosenthal is an Emmy Award-winning cinematographer and marine biologist who has filmed in ocean waters around the globe, including some of the world's most pristine MPAs.
So my professional background as a wildlife cameraman, filmmaker, as well as a biologist, has taken me a lot of places in the world. I get the opportunity to film, to dive, to interact with people, to be with fishermen, to be with kayakers. So in the last 50 years, I've seen a lot. So when I came back to the Channel Islands, places I dove as a boy or as a young biologist, and you know what? A few of those areas actually look better on the bottom. We were seeing lobsters come back, abalone, big fish. We're seeing the big sea bass we hadn't seen in decades. And to be right off the beach here and be out in the Channel Islands and to see all this wildlife, you can't do that in other places in the world. Not with this much diversity, not with that many surprises around the corners. And to swim through a kelp forest is still magical. Well, to grow up in California, but to come back, I feel proud that I'm on the California coast again.
We've got these national treasures that are off our coast. We've got incredible productivity for years and years. But the fact is, these areas have been in trouble. So now we're saying, let's be prudent. Let's have some areas that we're going to put aside. It's for current generations, but really it's for future generations. I want my grandson to see a fish off the coast of California.
California's marine protected areas are very much like national or state parks, special places set aside to protect precious resources and to protect the incredible diversity and abundance of our marine heritage for this and future generations.
All right, I hope you all enjoyed that little video. I truly think that that video can explain our network of MPAs here in California better than I ever could, with some really beautiful footage. So diving more into getting a little more localized here. Oops, don't do that. Next slide. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit more about this network of MPAs and how we as community members can be involved in these marine protected areas. So as you heard in that video, our marine protected areas here in California are managed by a few different agencies, and there's those 4 pillars of management: education and outreach, science, policy, and enforcement. So all of those pillars are managed by 2 different agencies, so the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then the Ocean Protection Council. And we have these 3 documents that essentially act as the management plans for these 124 MPAs. So we have a master plan for our MPAs. We have the collaborative approach. So you got to hear a little bit about the MPA Collaboratives. I happen to be the co-chair of our local Los Angeles MPA Collaborative. If anyone is interested in getting involved, please feel free to reach out to me. I believe the PVIC actually already is a member. And then we have our MPA Monitoring Action Plan. So these 3 documents are really what drive the management of these protected areas, to make sure that they're not just paper parks, they're not just, existing, but are actually being implemented. We're actually enforcing the rules. We're monitoring what's going on. We're looking at the changes. And I think that one of the coolest things about the way we manage our protected areas here in California is what we have. We have an adaptive management process, which essentially means that our management process is flexible. It can change with time based on the way things change. The Pacific Ocean is a cold water ecosystem. Changes happen slowly over time. And we know that we're going to have to revisit the way that we manage these MPAs and potentially change things over time. So this very confusing graphic is essentially the explanation for how this adaptive management process works. I'm not going to dive too deeply into this. It is a little wonky, but I do want to just call out the sort of 1, 2, 3 big squares here of the sort of 3 major steps. So the first one, which was identifying and updating the objectives. What are we really trying to accomplish with these protected areas? And then from there, we go to long-term monitoring. So once the MPA is established, we have to monitor what's going on inside those protected areas. So we're looking at things like kelp cover, we're looking at number of fish, we're looking at sort of the physical changes of, temperature and chemical levels. We're looking at, the health of the intertidal. We're looking at all kinds of things and monitoring them all the time. And we've been doing that for the past 10 years, which leads us to the third step in this adaptive management process, which is a 10-year review. So every 10 years, our MPAs go through a massive review process, and that's actually going to happen next year in 2022. Our MPAs are going to go through this management review. So any and all data that we have to reflect what's going on inside and also outside our MPAs is going to be very important for this management review and is a big part of what I'm doing with my work this year and next year. All right, so let's get local, let's get specific. You are all docents at the Point Vicente Interpretive Center, which means you actually have an MPA right there in your backyard. So let's learn a little bit more about these local MPAs. So as you learned in the video, we have a number of different flavors, if you will, of protected areas in the state of California. You got to learn a little bit about all of these. Here in Los Angeles County, we actually only have 3 of these of the 6 types. So we have state marine reserves, which is that red fish in the top left corner there. And in these reserves, there is absolutely no take of any kind allowed. No fishing, no removal of anything, even seashells. So this is the strictest and highest level of protection that we offer within our network. Then we also have what are called no-take state marine conservation areas. This is a kind of wonky one, and I'll explain it a little bit more here in a minute, but essentially they act basically just like a no-take reserve. Pretty much nothing is allowed in here other than some very specific incidental take that's permitted by other agencies. And then in LA County, we also have your traditional state marine conservation area, which is an area where some recreational or commercial fishing may be allowed. So certain species and certain gear types. We'll talk about that a little more here in a second. All right, so here's the first of the 2 MPAs that we have here in Palos Verdes. The first is the Point Vicente no-take state marine conservation area. So that's that purple fish you saw on the first slide over there. This MPA you can see on the map there on the left. It's a pretty good size MPA. It stretches from a whole chunk of the Palos Verdes coastline, including actually the Point Vicente Interpretive Center, the Point Vicente Lighthouse, Abalone Cove, and a number of other important sites that are in this area. And this is a unique MPA, and that is because it actually does allow for some take, some incidental take, what we call. And the reason is because some of you may know there actually is a Superfund site right off the coast of the Palos Verdes Shelf. For a long time, for many decades, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, there was dumping of DDT off of the Palos Verdes Shelf. And so there is some remediation for the Superfund site that takes place within this MPA. And so any essentially take of fish, so any fish that are accidentally killed during any remediation that happens in this MPA is allowed under this designation. So that's our Point Vicente SMCA. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what is and what is not allowed in this MPA, since this is the one that's right in your backyard. And I want all of you as docents to be armed and ready with tools to understand what is and is not allowed in this particular MPA. So the other MPA we have in Palos Verdes is the Abalone Cove State Marine Conservation Area. This is a smaller MPA that actually butts up right against the Point Vicente MPA, and it includes the Terranea Resort and the very well-known Abalone Cove. So there are certain types of fishing that are allowed in this particular MPA, but I do want to note really quickly before I move on to the specific fishing types that these 2 MPAs are very unique in that They are hot spots for poaching. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later of what poaching looks like and how to spot it. But Point Vicente in particular is a hot spot for poaching off of boats. And the Abalone Cove protected area is a hot spot for tide pool take. So we're seeing a pretty significant increase in collections from tide pools in Abalone Cove, potentially in conjunction with the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are two very important things to keep an eye out when you're in these areas. Poaching is absolutely happening in these areas. So in Abalone Cove, there are some things that are allowed. So the first thing that's allowed in Abalone Cove is recreational spearfishing. So pretty much any spearfishing is allowed as long as you are not on scuba. So scuba is not permitted for spearfishing anywhere in the state of California, but breath hold spearfishing is. And so you can see what that gear looks like. You can see someone underwater there in the bottom right of what that spearfishing gear looks like. So if you see someone fishing using this gear inside the Abalone Cove MPA, believe it or not, that's actually totally fine. The other type of fishing that's allowed inside Abalone Cove is commercial harpoon fishing for swordfish. This is a weird one. We don't see it very often, but it does exist. And the boat type is very, very specific. You can see what that boat looks like in these pictures and what the gear looks like. It is a large harpoon. And this is actually, again, also allowed inside the Abalone Cove State Marine Conservation Area. The third thing that's allowed is commercial net fishing, specifically for pelagic fish and bonito. So when we're talking about pelagic fish, we're talking about things like anchovies and mackerel, other fish that tend to swim further off of shore. And this activity is allowed within these MPAs. And the last is handheld dip net fishing for market squid. So again, very unique, very specific, and not very common type of fishing, but this is indeed allowed inside the Abalone Cove State Marine Conservation Area. Now, again, just a reminder, the Point Vicente SMCA is no take, no fishing, absolutely none allowed inside this particular MPA. So if you happen to be at the Point Vicente Interpretive Center doing your docent work and you see someone fishing off of the coast, they are not allowed to be doing that. So something to keep in mind. I will also note, you'll see this, this line along here of how far out the boundaries stretch. That is a 3 nautical mile line. So that's how far out our MPAs go. On a clear day from shore, if you are at sea level, that's about as far as you can see. Up on the bluff trails on a really, really clear day, you may be able to see further than that. But my general rule is if you can clearly see a boat that is fishing, they are not allowed to be there, and they're not allowed to be doing that if they're within the boundaries of this protected area. And again, that Abalone Cove area is limited take. So just a reminder of the difference between the two. Now, if you'd like more information about what is and is not allowed inside these MPAs and a better visual for the boundaries, the Point Vicente Interpretive Center will have these brochures. Sorry, it's going to be a little goofy because I have the blur on, but it's a guide to marine protected areas and fishing within Los Angeles County. These brochures are excellent. They have all kinds of information for what is and is not allowed inside our protected areas and show the boundary markers inside. So I will be sharing a link in the chat so that you can actually go and download this brochure and be able to look at it whenever you want. But these will also be available at the Interpretive Center so that everything I said to you today, you don't have to memorize. It'll be right there in your pocket if you want it. All right, so let's say you are walking the trails near the Point Vicente Lighthouse. You look down off the bluff and you see a boat. And on that boat, you see folks fishing. That is a clear indicator that you are seeing some illegal fishing activity. So what should you do? The number one most important thing is to stay safe. We do not encourage approaching a poacher. If you choose to do so, that is entirely your own call. That is not something that I'm going to encourage you to do today. There are trained officers that are, that is their job to approach any illegal fishing activity and deal with it. But what you can do is report what you see. So I highly recommend all of you to actually take out your phones if you have them in front of you and save this number. This number is CalTIP. That stands for Californians Turn In Poachers and Polluters. So this number is essentially your opportunity to anonymously report any illegal fishing activity that you are seeing off of our coast. Now, when you call CalTIP, I have some tips and tricks for you for a successful call that will actually lead to potential enforcement action, or at least some outreach and education. So the first thing that you're gonna want to make sure you know is, where are you and what exactly are you reporting? So have a good understanding of your surroundings. For example, I'm at the Point Vicente Lighthouse, right? And then also, what exactly are you reporting? So for example, you may be reporting an illegal fishing boat. You may be reporting someone who's standing on shore and fishing from shore. Or if you're in Abalone Cove, for example, you may be reporting folks that are collecting out of the tide pools, perhaps folks that are filling coolers up with mussels inside Abalone Cove. So take note of where you are and what it is that you're reporting. When you call, you're going to want to be prepared with as much detail about the poaching activity as you possibly can be. So you're going to want to know everything that you possibly can about the person that you're seeing. So for a boat, you're going to want to know the size, the color, the name if you can see it, the position of the boat, and then the gear type that's being used. So binoculars are really great for this. I highly recommend. I know a lot of you probably already carry binoculars on you, but being able to see what gear the fisherman or angler is using is really helpful, whether it's hook and line or a net or traps, etc. For an individual person, you're going to want to know what clothing they're wearing, a physical description of the person, how many people there are, what their location is, and again, what gear type they're using. Now, this option is totally optional, but I recommend leaving a number for a callback. So when you call, the dispatcher is going to ask you where you are, and then they're going to direct you to the right person. They're going to ask you what you're seeing, and they're going to ask you for all of these physical descriptors. And then they're going to ask if you want to leave a number. So you can leave the report completely, or give the report completely anonymously, but if you'd like to, you can leave that number to call back. And what will often happen is sometimes a warden, if they are nearby, they will call you back and ask for some more specific information. And this will often lead to an enforcement action. So either the person gets a warning, or if this is not their first offense, they will get a citation. And this kind of watchdog activity of extra eyes on the water for community members like you is one of the most effective ways that we can ensure compliance with the local MPA regulations. Not only making sure that folks who are, breaking the rules are getting citations, but we also just want to make sure people are informed. We don't want to be handing out tickets willy-nilly. If this is someone who doesn't know they're breaking the rules, we just want them to know. And this is a great way that you as a community member can contribute to compliance within our protected areas. Now, if you are in Palos Verdes, you can also call the Ranchos Palos Verdes Ranger Hotline. So we work directly with the local RPV rangers, and they do regular education and outreach, particularly in Abalone Cove. So if you are seeing some illegal poaching activity going on and you want to make sure that those folks are getting some good outreach and education, then I recommend also grabbing that phone number and saving it as well. This is a little bit different than CalTIP, so I do recommend doing both. CalTIP will inform enforcement wardens who can actually give tickets. RPV rangers can't do that right now, but they are wonderful at education and outreach, and it is a great number to call. Just as a reminder, your safety is the #1 most important thing. So remember to maintain your own safety. That is the most important thing when you're out and about, being a watchdog, keeping an eye on our MPAs. If it is going to endanger you in any way to do any of these things, please don't. But this is a great way, again, like I said, to contribute to managing these protected areas. Now, if you're wanting to get even more involved, other than just calling in poaching when you see it, I do have another opportunity for you, which is the MPA Watch program. MPA Watch is an awesome program that I actually run here at Heal the Bay. It's a community science program that trains volunteers to observe and collect data on the human use of our coastal and marine resources. And they're doing that both inside and outside of protected areas. So our volunteers are essentially doing transect surveys. It's kind of like long walks on the beach plus people watching equal science. So our volunteers are using standardized protocols. They're walking along the beach and collecting relevant, scientifically rigorous, and broadly accessible data. They're walking along the bluff trails, walking along the beaches, and they're actually tallying every person that they see and what they're doing, whether it's illegal or not. This data is meant to inform the management and enforcement of our protected areas. Remember earlier when I was talking about that adaptive management process and that review, that 10-year review we're going to have next year? MPA Watch has been operating for the last 10 years, and all of our data is going to go towards that review process. It's going to be used as a better understanding of what people are doing inside our protected areas, how much illegal activity is going on, and maybe able to also be used as a comparison to biological data. So we can compare biological data with human presence and be able to make those comparisons. By involving our local communities in this data collection, MPA Watch inspires and empowers stewardship and helps to educate the public about California's MPAs and our local ecosystems. There are 4 main goals to this program. The first is to actually use the data to determine how successful MPAs are at meeting their goal of enhancing recreational activities along our coasts. The second is to help provide contextual information on human use for interpreting that biological data that I was talking about there a moment ago. The third is to inform enforcement. So we act as watchdogs. All of our volunteers are trained in how to call CalTIP and how to deal with poaching activities. And then also our final goal is our MPA Watch volunteers act as stewards to our ocean, and they're also effective public educators. So every time they're out on the beach, out on the bluffs, they're chatting with people, they're talking to them about our MPAs and broadening that education and that outreach. Our MPA Watch volunteers are amazing. I have to admit, this is my favorite program that I do at Heal the Bay. I love this work. Our volunteers are so awesome. They are range anywhere from 14 years of age to folks that are retired and looking for something else to do. And they are all really passionate, really dedicated. What's great about this program is it is entirely flexible. So we just ask that our volunteers complete 4 surveys a month. Those surveys can happen whenever you want and at whichever transect you want them to happen at. It's a really flexible program, and these volunteers really are essential. They are providing data that I alone could never possibly provide. And our volunteers are also part of a statewide network. Heal the Bay is one of 9 organizations all up and down the coast that are monitoring over half of the MPAs within our network through this program. So it's a really phenomenal way to get involved and actually get out there, collect data that is being used. And that data really truly is being used. Twice a year, I go in and I grab all of the data and I write these comprehensive data reports and they get sent to the state. So this program really is an awesome way to get directly involved with management and collect real data and really get involved in the science. And it's also really fun. So for this program, we actually only do 4 trainings a year, and we just so happen to be having a training next week. So we're doing a training on May 19th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So I'm actually going to toss a link in the chat. This is the registration link. So you can actually click that link and register to join us next week for an MPA Watch training if you're interested in joining this program. So for the training, we're doing all of our trainings entirely virtually right now. So you can do it completely from the comfort of your own home. It involves 2 training videos and 2 quizzes to complete before the actual date of the training, and then the virtual classroom training and a background check. Once you do those things, you get to be an MPA Watch volunteer for life. You are part of the program forever, however long you'd like to be part of the program. We provide all of the kits that you need. And everything that you'll need to be a volunteer for the program. So as you can tell, I am actively recruiting for this program. We are about to hit the summer months. We are expecting our beaches to be very, very busy this summer, and we need some dedicated volunteers that can go out and collect some data on what's going on inside these MPAs. So with that, We have about like 15 to 20 minutes left here for questions. I can answer any and all questions that you may have. Feel free to toss your questions in the chat and I can read them, or I can also just answer them. You can unmute yourself and ask them to me directly, whatever's easier for you. And I do actually already see a question in the chat. So while you're thinking of any questions that you might have for me, let's see, Alan and Terry, is there an age requirement to take the training? Yes, our MPA Watch volunteers do need to be at least 14 years of age, but there is no age maximum. So as long as you are at least 14 years old, you can join the program. And if you're between the ages of 14 and 18, you do have to have a parent or guardian join you in the training and also on your transects. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or just toss them in the chat.
Hi, Rod Jensen here.
Hi, Rod.
I report fishermen all the time. And I'm just wondering, would reporting it through you get a better response? Because there's especially around the Abalone Cove, Point Vicente area, I report it and then I try and go on the radio, and then the Coast Guard tells me to go away, and because I'm on their band. Anyway, I feel like they're not doing anything about the illegal fishing.
It's a great question. So when you're reporting, are you calling CalTIP? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, at this point in time, and yes, I am very aware that CalTIP is not a perfect service. Unfortunately, our California Department of Fish and Wildlife wardens are very understaffed. So we only have a handful of wardens for the entirety of LA County. So what often happens is you put in a phone call, a warden gets that call and they're like, okay, there is, a boat fishing illegally off of Point Vicente, but I'm in the Santa Monica Mountains. Crap, I'm not gonna be able to get there for 2 hours, right? So that is what happens to us very, very often. So that's why I recommend also calling the RPV rangers versus calling me. So I'm based up in Santa Monica. So if you're seeing any illegal activity going on in the Palos Verdes area, I won't be able to do a whole lot about it, but the rangers will. They'll be able to actually go, if the person's on shore at least, they'll be able to go up to that person, talk to that person, give them one of these handy dandy fishing guides. And while they can't give them a ticket, they can explain to them what they're doing, and they can encourage them to put what they've taken back. Or if they haven't started, they can encourage them not to start taking. As far as the Abalone Cove tide pooling issue, I hear you. It's extremely frustrating. And again, CDFW is so limited on staff and so limited on funding that they only have like a handful of people that they can send out. So again, the RPV rangers, those are your best bet. Call that ranger hotline, let them know what you're seeing. And if what's happening is on shore, they'll get down there with some outreach, some materials to help. But that's a great question, Rod. So yeah, calling me, unfortunately, won't do a whole lot of good. I'm just a scientist. All right, looks like there's some questions coming in the chat. Oh, Ronnie, thank you very much. You're so welcome. That would be awesome. I'm more than happy to supply any information to include in your docent training if you'd like. Let's see, Denise and Norm, how long have the MPAs been in existence and who determined the size? Oof. Great question. I could give a talk just on this alone, actually. So our network of MPAs in California were established through the Marine Life Management Act the Marine Life Protection Act, the MLPA. The MLPA was passed back in 1999, and then it resulted in a sort of geographical chunk process where we worked in the Central Coast and then the South Coast and then the South Central Coast and then the North Coast. So who determined the size of each? How long they've been in place depends where they are. So the oldest ones are out on the Channel Islands. The newest ones are in the North Coast. Newest ones are about 10 years old. The oldest ones are more like 15 to 20. But there were MPAs in place even before the MLPA, right? So there are some that are 30 to 40 years old that have been around for a very long time. Most of them are newer than that. Most of them are about a decade old. And essentially what they did was they did a stakeholder engagement process. So over the course of many, many years, they had a number of different representatives from lots of different stakeholder groups. So scientists, NGOs, fishermen and other anglers, all kinds of different people, community members were brought together to the table. And they started out by basically just putting down a map and having people like actually stack pennies of where they wanted those MPAs to go. That's how the process started. Obviously got quite a bit more scientific than that as time went on. But essentially who had the final say and determining where they went and how big they were was what was called the Blue Ribbon Task Force. So the Blue Ribbon Task Force was this group of folks that were very, very experienced in marine management and took all of that stakeholder input and determined where these MPAs were going to go and how big they were going to be. So it was a massive group effort. Let's see, again, great question. The state of Washington or Oregon. So these states were involved specifically because this network of MPAs is a state managed network. So essentially the way that we manage our oceans is in the United States, at least, is the states are allowed to manage within 3 miles of their coast, but only within their own state. And then the federal government can manage between 3 and 200 miles out. So because this process was a state process, it was only the state of California that went through this process. Now, that being said, we collaborate with the states of Washington and Oregon quite a lot through the West Coast Ocean Alliance, I think is what it's called. So while this process was specifically a California process, Oregon and Washington also have their own state managed MPAs, and we collaborate with them a lot. Let's see, Alan. No worries about the microphone or camera. For the RPD staff, is it possible to volunteer or gather information while on a shift? Assuming we might need to get approval from our supervisor. So that's a great question. I think you would have to ask for approval on that. My answer is totally go for it. There does happen to be an MPA Watch transect right out front of the Point Vicente Interpretive Center. It's a short one. It's an easy one. It's a paved trail. It's actually probably the easiest one we have. Some of them are a lot more strenuous. So if that is something that your supervisors are comfortable with, then yeah, I say go for it. So if you wanted to join the MPA Watch program, that would be really cool. The other thing is while on shift, instead of actually collecting data, you could also just keep an eye out for poachers. And if you see one, call them in.
I have a quick question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
So first of all, very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we are down at Abalone Cove, or if we're out near the water, on the water, and we see something that, you know, people are taking from the tide pools, do we have access to some sort of like brochure or a pamphlet that we can, you know, keep in our backpacks that basically explain this is a no take zone, the fine is up to this amount of dollars, so that, you know, we don't have to get into a confrontation per se, but at least we're educating the takers.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a flyer that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife developed last summer specifically just for this. I don't have it in front of me, but I can definitely share it. And I don't see why you couldn't print it and take it with you. It does have the CDFW stamp of approval on it, and it is what their outreach associates are using. So I can share that with Anne, and that can be shared alongside the slides to this presentation are also going to be shared with all of you. So I'd be happy to share that. The other option is this brochure is a really, really great option. So like I mentioned, these brochures are going to be available at PVIC. You're welcome to grab a stack and hand these out too. This is a great one to hand out specifically if you are in Abalone Cove. So the other flyer is better if you're in an area where take is allowed, because it essentially says like, here's what you are allowed to take, here's what you're not allowed to take. It doesn't say anything on it like, this is an MPA. This one, however, does. This one tells you exactly where the MPAs are and what the boundaries are. Sorry, I'm going to turn the blur off because that's kind of messing with my ability to show you this. How do I do that?
A taser would work.
There we go. So this is what that brochure looks like. So this is definitely my recommended resource for if you're in Abalone Cove to pass these out. So I'll make sure PVIC has a big box of these so you can grab them and use them. Abalone Cove also does have signage, and we're working on updating that signage right now so that it's more clear that you are like not allowed to collect there. And we're working with the RPV rangers on that.
Emily, we're seeing your final slide that says questions. I don't see the brochure on the screen.
Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry about that. I can do this. There we go. And I will, my face should still be spotlighted. So
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So there's that brochure. Sorry about that. I didn't realize it was still showing that. And yeah, I have a whole bunch of them. I've still got a few hundred of those. So I'll definitely get those down to that interpretive center. Let's see, a question from Keith. Abalone staff monitor the tide pools daily and are often intercepting poachers that are and returning wildlife. Yes, keeping in-depth reports, absolutely, and all that data is going up the chain. Yeah, that's amazing. So the rangers are also giving us some really great reports every single week. So Evan and Norma, staff over at RPV, we're getting those reports, and so we're seeing what's happening, which is great. So very, very glad that information is being documented, and that information is also being organized into monthly reports and is being sent to the state as well. So yeah, that's great, Keith. Thank you.
Looks like everybody's gotten quiet.
Well, I can work on dropping a few other things in the chat. I know I mentioned I was going to grab the brochure that you can download. So let me grab that for all of you. So you can, instead of waiting to pick them up, you can actually print them at home if you wanted to. Let's see.
Emily, Sue Walsh had a question. I don't know if you answered it or not. Is there another MPA off Cabrillo State Beach in San Pedro?
Off of Cabrillo State Beach. I do not believe that is a protected area, no. So I was actually just there a couple of weeks ago and we were collecting animals for the aquarium. So yeah, no, there's definitely not an MPA there. That is, fishing is allowed there. I can also grab a map for all of you of where all of the MPAs are, so you can actually check out all of them. But let me grab, here we are, fishing brochure in English. We also have this fishing brochure in Spanish, so you're welcome to grab that as well. But there's the link, so you can download that fishing brochure right there at that link. And then let me grab a map for all of you as well to show you where all of the different marine protected areas are.
So Emily, why not just create one giant marine protected area for the entire coastline of the state of California? Like, why did they pick and choose areas? Were there sensitive species there, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the major reason that we decided not to do that is it would make a lot of anglers very unhappy. So limiting the amount of fishing along the entire coast of LA would really be an inequitable option, particularly for folks that rely heavily on fishing for their own subsistence, for feeding their families, for selling and making money for their families. So protecting the entire coastline, while from a conservation perspective sounds great, from a sort of an ocean resource use perspective is not equitable and not a good option for all the folks that are involved. So the spots that were chosen for a variety of different reasons. They may already be a very important ecological place as far as what's going on with the ecosystem there. For example, I know that's why the MPAs in Palos Verdes were chosen, because they already have beautiful kelp forests that are really important fishing grounds and also just really important to the biodiversity and to the whole ecosystem. So that's why they were chosen. Some spots were actually chosen because they're heavily degraded and they needed help. They needed to basically get an opportunity to take a break and to recover. So there were a few different reasons that spots were chosen. But yeah, that's why we didn't just make the whole coast one big protected area. So it's about 16% of our coast that is protected under this under this law essentially. And here's a great map that I want to show you all so you can sort of see. I wish I could make this bigger. Let's see if I can. Here we go. All right, I'm going to show you all a picture really quickly so you can see. So here are all the MPAs in the entire state. I wonder if I can zoom in. Yeah, beautiful.
Perfect.
So you can see MPAs dotting pretty much the entire coastline, including the Channel Islands. And there's all these different types of MPAs. And there's also those special closures, which actually mean that those are places that you're not even allowed to go to. So yeah, we have all, and they're also in estuarine waters as well. So you can see there's actually marine parks like inside San Francisco Bay. So yeah, this is where they all are.
And there was one more question from Adela. What is being done about sea stars off PV?
Sea stars, can you elaborate a little bit more?
They're dying off, correct?
Yes. Okay. So that's a great question. I'll leave this map up here for those of you that want to take more of a look. So essentially what we're seeing with our sea star population is a couple of years ago, we had a huge increase in what was called sea star wasting disease. Sea star wasting disease, we believe, was climate change related. It happened after a particularly hot summer. It was after an El Nino. So we saw very hot waters. I actually very vividly remember this, the water down where I was living at the time in San Diego hit 80 degrees. I remember surfing in a bikini and being like, what's going on? So essentially that increase in ocean temperature allows for disease to spread more easily. And so we saw this huge outbreak in sea star wasting disease. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that humans can do to stop sea star wasting disease. I mean, it's kind of like an ocean version of the pandemic. It's very difficult to slow. And we can't exactly force our sea stars to socially distance from each other. So we did see a huge die-off. So one of the great things is that our ocean ecosystems are really good at recovering on their own if we give them the opportunity to. So we actually are seeing our sea stars come back. So what we were able to do was basically put a moratorium on all sea star collecting. So even for our aquarium that we have underneath the Santa Monica Pier, we weren't allowed to collect sea stars for like 2 or 3 years. We still aren't allowed to. So we're really trying to give the sea star population an opportunity to bounce back, mostly because they're so important to our kelp forests. They eat urchins, and urchins eat kelp. So because of the loss of sea stars, we're seeing increases in urchin barrens. We're seeing loss of kelp forests. So what we can do is just limit our take, and we can reduce climate change impacts. We can reduce our input of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We can try to reduce that warming. We can do everything that we can other than actually go in and treat the sea stars with medicine. That's not really an option. But that's what we're doing for the sea star population. It's a great question.
Diane,
let's see, Diane and then Rod.
Okay, hi, great presentation. I wish we had more time. Sue had mentioned that there is no MPAs by Cabrillo Beach, but also a lot of us are docents at the Land Conservancy, which is not too far from there. So I'm assuming then we don't have an MPA in that area because there's a great large recreational area there that people may be fishing in that area as well.
As far as I know, I don't believe so. So that in that whole general area, the only MPAs are the two that I pointed out, the Vicente and Abalone Cove. But that being said, outreach outside of MPAs is still really, really important. So for example, if any of you have been to White Point or Sacred Cove, those are two areas that are not inside MPAs, but are getting hammered with tide.
Yes, yeah, that's why I asked, yes.
Yeah, so outreach can still happen in those areas, and you can essentially be encouraging folks to make sure they're not collecting with tools, that they have a fishing license, that they're not collecting more than they're supposed to be collecting. So that's what that CDFW flyer is really good for. And I'm actually going to pause sharing my screen, and I'll actually open up. I have that flyer, so I'm going to go grab it so you can all see it, and I'll make sure this flyer gets shared with you too. So even if it's not inside an MPA, outreach is still important.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Diane. Go ahead, Rod, and I'll pull up.
Hey, I used to snorkel in Abalone Cove a lot, and I had a a 20-foot piece of steel pipe, and I would snorkel along and I would smash purple sea urchins because the floor, the ground is just carpeted. I mean, it's just purple everywhere. And the ranger got extremely upset at me.
Yeah.
Because I was inside the MPA.
Yes, that is definitely not allowed inside the MPA. So urchin smashing is something that we're experimentally working with in the North Coast. So there is a small group of state-sanctioned divers that are essentially doing an experiment to see if urchin smashing even works. And the reason I don't recommend it to just your everyday snorkeler or diver is that when a healthy urchin is smashed, they actually can release gametes. And so they can even still reproduce even after that happens. So what I recommend is MPAs are really designed to essentially be places that people are not getting involved in at all. And even take of an animal that is invasive can impact the area's ability to naturally recover on its own. That being said, the state is looking at what restoration projects inside MPAs might look like. So that is something that we're looking at and thinking about. But I understand the frustration 100%. Every time I go to White Point, I'm like, I just want to take all of the urchins. But a certain level of urchins in our ecosystem actually is very healthy. So removing all the urchins would also be a bad thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great question. And I'm looking for this brochure for you all. Oh, I think I found it. Yay. All right. So this is the brochure that CDFW is using in all of their outreach. This is what I recommend if you happen to be in an area where take is allowed, like White Point or Sacred Cove. But it basically just says, you need a fishing license. This is what you're not allowed to take. This is what you are allowed to take and how much of it you're allowed to take. So this is a great double-sided flyer. I'll share it with you all. You're welcome to use this. It's a great thing to pass out to people that are collecting.
Would you be able to bring one of those or two of those to the PVIC when you come by?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I could bring you a whole stack of them. Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Sure. My pleasure. All right, I do realize we are a few minutes over, so I can hang out for just another minute. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to ask.
Where is the address for the class?
Online.
For MPA Watch, it's all virtual, all totally online.
Where? What's the address? How do I get it?
Oh, it's to sign up to register for the training. It's in the chat. So I sent it in the chat a little while ago, but I can also resend it. It's a little bit of a long link. It's through Eventbrite. So I recommend clicking it through the chat box there. But we can also, Anne, send a follow-up email with the link. Is that possible?
Sure.
Great.
There we go.
So I'll grab that link for you one more time so that you have it. I'll make it the most recent thing in the chat.
And, I'm asking a redundant question. I wasn't clear, if it's not a marine protected area, are people allowed to take anything from a tadpole?
No, they are not. So if it is a marine protected area, there are absolutely limits to what you are and are not allowed to take. And I can actually walk you through those really quickly.
Well, I'm talking about a
Correct. Yeah. So even if you're not in a protected area, there are things that you're not allowed to take. So for example, you are only allowed to take lobster if it's within lobster season. So that's October through March, and you can't take any lobsters that have a smaller than a 3¼ inch carapace. You also cannot collect any sea stars ever. No sea stars can ever be collected out of a tide pool, no matter where you are. Same with chitin, same with abalone, gooseneck barnacles, and all other barnacle species. So these things are never allowed to be taken out of tide pools, even if you're not inside a protected area. These are the broader fishery regulations that we have in the state of California. There's also limits to what you are allowed to take. So for example, you can't take more than 35 hermit crabs, more than 35 each of hermit crabs, shore crabs, turban snails, and limpets. There's also a limit to same with rock crabs and purple urchins. You can't take more than 35 of each of those, and there are size limits. So for rock crabs, they have to be at least 4 inches. So similarly to fishing regulations with, how many you're allowed to take, what species you're allowed to take, and what size you're allowed to take, same thing with tide pool collections. So just like you're not allowed to catch Garibaldi, you're not allowed to catch giant black sea bass, and you're not allowed to catch, a rockfish that's smaller than a certain size. Similar regulations exist within our tide pools. Great question.
I'm surprised those quantities are so large, because if you were to go down to San Pedro, 2 people at 35 each would wipe out the entire tide pool.
Yes, that is a problem we are experiencing in a couple of our non-MPA tide pool areas that we're working closely with CDFW to try to figure out what to do about that. So yeah, if you have 50 people in a tide pool at low tide all summer long, and even if they're taking what they're allowed to take, unfortunately, for example, at White Point, we've seen a huge decrease in biodiversity there based on long-term monitoring. So even though a lot of the take was legal. So that's what's tough about this. Doing emergency regulations is really difficult, the way our current system is set up. So for example, we probably should have limited all of this take to a much smaller number. But that didn't happen. That has to happen through the regulatory process. And unfortunately, I can scream and shout and be the squeaky wheel, but without the Fish and Game Commission making that choice, it doesn't happen.
What about the other animals like octopus and sea hare?
Great question. I believe there are take limits for those animals as well, also size limits. I don't know them off the top of my head though. So I think, for octopus, you know what, I'm actually not even going to guess because I don't want to give you wrong information. So I'm not sure, but yes, there are regulations to what you can take.
Wow. That's a shame that you can take anything.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what specifically it is, what size it is, and how many you're taking and where you are, yeah, there are allowances for it. So, which I think, in certain cases is a great thing. There's cultural significance to collecting and eating animals like crab and urchin and mussel, and we want to respect those cultural and obviously nutritional needs, but balance them with the needs of protecting the ecosystem as well. It's a difficult balance to strike.
On that note,
I'm just thinking a tide pool is so fragile.
Yes, they are. They're very fragile.
And on that note, some people are doing this for commerce. So it seems that if they're collecting them without a business license, that should be some, I don't know. This is just, with the
it's tricky.
With the limits so high, she's right. It's a shame, and it just seems like there's a dismal future for our local tide pools here because of people not only maybe feeding their family but doing it for commerce. And I don't what to do, right?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And we've been sort of chewing on this for a while, trying to figure out exactly how to combat this. One of the things that I'm actually working on is developing a survey of tide pool collection activities to better understand what's being collected, where folks are coming from to collect, what languages they're speaking, and what they're planning on doing with their collections, whether it's to feed their family, to sell, etc. Because the better data we have to better understand the population of people, the better we can combat the problem in an equitable and just way. So yeah, it's a great point. It's a very complex issue that we have many people working on within our LA MPA Collaborative to try to figure out what the best way to tackle it is. Yeah, but I agree, it's complex.
Emily, real quick question. How is there a link or to download that chart you just showed us?
There isn't a link for that one. It isn't posted online, but I may be able to share the file in the chat. Let's see. And if not, then in the follow-up email, I'll make sure it gets shared. And I'll also make sure that it is, there are stacks of them that I can bring down to PBIC as well.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can share it in the chat. Let me try. Oh, it's not going to let me. Of course not. And it's not going to let me upload a file to the Normally it does let me do that. That's annoying. Well, I'll make sure it gets shared. With that, we are about 10 minutes over, so I do want to let you all go and enjoy your lunchtime.
Thank you, Emily.
My pleasure. Yeah, Anne, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully I'll be back for a talk with all of you about plastic pollution at some point.
Yeah, everybody. She has other subjects she can talk about, including plastic and let's see, where's my list here? I got it. Okay, she's got plastic, turtles, and harmful algal blooms. So we'll see her again, I hope.